Welcome to part 3 of your sewing project, in which we transfer the paper pattern onto our nice pressed fabric. So before you begin this step, let's go over some things that you need to make sure you have with you. First of all, it's going to be very important to have your fabric already pressed and ready to go. If your fabric is wrinkly, you're going to end up creating errors as you transfer the pattern onto the fabric, and we don't want that. So make sure that your fabric is pressed, nice and neat, and ready to go. You are also going to need your fabric marker. I'm using my quilter's pencil. If you are somebody who prefers to use a washable marker or a water-soluble marker, make sure that that is available to you and ready to go. Of course, you will need your pattern pieces. For the stocking, don't forget that we've got the foot of the stocking as well as the cuff of the stocking. You are also going to need some items to help weight down the pattern. We don't want to use tape because the stick of the tape will end up causing problems for us later down the road. So what we use instead are items called pattern weights. Now, a lot of times they make special, pretty hefty pattern weights, but for our purposes, it's going to be perfectly fine to just grab a random collection of objects just to hold your pattern in place while you're transferring it. And then finally, you're going to need your fabric shears or your school scissors. Remember, when you go to cut your fabric, fabric shears are only for fabric and should be plenty sharp enough to cut whatever kind of material you are working with, unless you've chosen leather. If you've chosen leather, we've got another issue altogether. If, however, you have chosen regular old school scissors, bear in mind they may not be quite sharp enough to cut through fabric. They will probably do a decent job. The trick will be to take your time and go slowly, otherwise you risk fraying your fabric. So, let's begin. Your fabric has a right side and a wrong side. If you're working with a solid color piece, it can be difficult to tell which is which. But if you're working with a piece of material that is printed like the one I'm working with here, then it's really obvious. The right side is brightly colored, is very bold. This is the side that you would want people to see. The wrong side looks faded. It looks grayed out. This is the side that you would not want people to see. So I'm going to use the terms right side and wrong side quite a lot as we move forward. So the first thing you are going to want to do is take your fabric and lay it on your work surface so that the wrong side is facing up. For the stocking project, we will need to cut 2 of each of our pattern pieces. One with side A facing up and one with side B facing up. So what I'm going to do is arrange my pattern piece on my fabric with side A facing up. I'm going to use some random items to weight my pattern down so that it doesn't move around on me. Then I'm going to take my marker and I'm going to trace around the outside of the pattern. I decided to use the washable marker just to make it easier to show up on camera. Once I have traced my pattern piece with side A facing up, then I'm going to flip my pattern piece over so that side B is facing up, move it to a different part of my fabric, and trace that out again. Before I move on, I do want to indicate which part is side A and which part is side B. So I'm just going to use my marker to very lightly put the letter A so that I know that this was side A. I'm going to very lightly mark this piece to indicate that this is side B, just to keep it straight in my mind. Once I've got my patterns traced onto my fabric, I'm ready to cut the pieces out of the fabric. I like to reserve my scraps just in case I ever need filler for any kind of three-dimensional project. So I don't always throw my scraps away. I'm going to set them in my little scrap pile for a project at a later date. Now that I have my 2 cuff pieces cut out and ready to go, it's time to do my 2 foot pieces. If you are doing your cuff pieces for your stocking in a contrasting color, the process is exactly the same. Make sure your fabric is laid on your work surface wrong side up and trace your pattern twice. Once with side A facing up and once with side B facing up, then cut your pattern pieces out. Now it's time to cut out the foot of our stocking. So I'm going to follow exactly the same steps that I followed making my cuff. I'm going to lay out my fabric, ensuring that the wrong side is facing up on my work surface. The next step is to lay out my pattern with side A facing up and trace this out using my fabric marker or my pencil, whatever it is I'm using to trace my pattern. Once I've done that, I'm going to put a little notation just to remind myself that this is side A. Then I'm going to flip my pattern piece over so that side B is facing up and trace my pattern out again. Now, you may be tempted to rotate your pattern to fill in the gaps. If you are working with a solid piece of material for a beginner project like this, I am not going to fault you for that. However, if you're working with a patterned piece of material, resist the temptation. Otherwise, your pattern will look different on either side. It won't be nice and uniform all the way around. So resist the temptation to rotate if you are working with a printed fabric like this one is. Once you've done that, remove your pattern weights, mark this piece as side B, and then you're ready to cut out your pieces. And there you have it. You have 2 sides of your Christmas stocking. It was up to you whether or not to use a contrasting or complementary fabric for the cuff of your stocking. But regardless of which option you chose, whether your cuff will match your stocking or whether it will complement or contrast with your stocking, you should have a grand total of 2 cuff pieces and 2 foot pieces. There is one more piece that you need. You will need a strip of material approximately 1 inch wide and 6 inches long with which to make the tab that you can hang your stocking up with. So you will have a grand total of 5 pieces once you are done cutting everything out. 2 foot pieces, 2 cuff pieces, and 1 tab piece, 1 hook, hanger, whatever you want to call the little thing that you're going to use to hang your stocking up on a hook. A grand total of 5 pieces. Once you have all 5 pieces cut out, you are ready to move on to the next part where we assemble our stocking.